Intertemporal choice. So when individual is making choices over a time, so such a thing is called intertemporal choice. So when consumer is going to make a choice over time, then that is called intertemporal choice. Please write when consumer make choices over time, right? Make consumption choices over time, make choices about consumption over time. Over time, it is called intertemporal choice. So up until now we have just seen what? We have seen there are two goods and you are making a choices that how much of good one you're going to consume, how much of good two you're going to consume given your budget and the prices. So now what we are saying is that now there are two time periods. So how much you're going to consume in time period 1 and how much you're going to consume in time period 2. That is what we're going to look at now. So C1, C2 is what? The consumption in 2 periods. So the individual is living for 2 periods, let's say. So in period 1 he is consuming C1, in period 2 he is consuming C2. M1, M2. So this is the income of the individual in time period 1 and the income of the individual in time period 2. So he's living for 2 periods. In period 1 he is young and in period 2 he is old. So in period 1 his income is M1 and in period 2 his income is M2. Income of an individual in period 1 and 2 respectively. R. What is R? R is the interest rate at which consumer can freely borrow or lend. So what the text is assuming is that is the same rate. I mean, of course, in the numerical questions you can have different borrowing rate or the lending rate, but what we are assuming for the sake of simplicity right now is that it is the same rate of interest for borrowing or for lending. It is the rate at which you can freely borrow or lend. The interest rate R at which consumer can borrow or lend. At which consumer can borrow or lend. What are P1, P2? P1, P2 are the prices of consumption in time period 1 and 2. So you're consuming C1. At what price you're consuming C1? P1. At what price you're consuming C2? P2. Prices of consumption. In period 1 and period 2 respectively, and we're going to make our life simpler by assuming that the prices of the consumption in time period 1 and 2 are both equal to 1. Prices of consumption in time period 1 and 2 are both equal to 1. So the question is, what is the budget constraint when the consumer tries to be a saver in time period 1, right? budget constraint. When consumer tries to be a saver in period 1, right? When consumer tries to be a saver in period 1. So let's have a look at this. So when will you be a saver? Think about it. When you're going to consume less than your income. So at that point, you guys will be a saver, right? So you will be saver when you're going to consume less than what your income is. So in time period 1, your income is M1, your consumption is C1, and if M1 minus C1 is going to be positive, you'll be saver. So savings are what? M1 minus C1. You understand that. So I am this individual and my income in time period 1 is M1, my consumption in time period 1 is C1, and if my income is more than what my consumption is, it means I am saving something in time period 1. Supposedly if I have deposited these savings in banks, then I am going to earn interest on those savings. Interest on savings R into M1 minus C1. Income in period 2, is going to be M2. What is going to be consumption in period 2, beta? So your consumption in period 2 would be equal to income in period 2, है ना? That's what your budget would look like. Consumption in period 2 income in period 2. But income in period 2 are coming through 3 sources. What are those sources? Those sources are your natural income in period 2, which is M2. You must have saved something from the earlier period. Those are your savings. And you would have invested these savings back into the bank and earned some interest. So those interest on savings are also what your income is. So income is your natural income in period 2 plus savings from period 1 plus you would have earned some interest on the savings. You with me? So this is what your total income is. Your natural income M2, savings M1 minus C1, interest on these savings R into M1 minus C1. And what is your expenditure in period 2? P2 into C2. What is your expenditure in period 2? P2 into C2. Beta, but P2 is equal to 1. So it is C2 is equal to M2 plus M1 minus C1 plus R into M1 minus C1. You with me? Plus R into M1 minus C1. Are you with me? And this is what is going to be my consumption in time period 2. So, okay. Let me also write. I mean, this is, I'll be writing the budget constraint in both present value and the future value form, but let me just write one more point. If you want to write the budget constraint when the consumer tries to be a borrower, so we have seen the case when the consumer tries to be a saver. Let's look at the case. So, please write. Budget constraint. when consumer tries to be a borrower in period 1. When consumer tries to be a borrower in period 1. So how do you do that? So when he tries to be a borrower in period 1, it means that he is going to consume more than what his income in period 1. Then only he would be a borrower, right? So borrowings are going to be C1 minus M1, right? Borrowings are going to be C1 minus M1. Since you have borrowed something, it means that you would have to pay interest on those borrowings as well. So that would be R into C1 minus M1, right? So your income in time period 2 is what? M2. From that income, your borrowings would be reduced because you have already taken, you have consumed more in time period 1 than what your income was. And since you have borrowed something, you would also have to pay interest on those borrowings. So those interest on borrowings would also be reduced from your income. So how do you write that? So consumption in time period 2 is, expenditure on consumption is P2 into C2. What is your income in time period 2? Please look at it carefully. Your income is M2 minus, since you have borrowed the amount, those borrowings will be reduced from that income. Then interest on these borrowings will also be reduced. Interest on these borrowings would also be reduced. And since P2 is equal to 1, I can actually write this as like this. Since P2 is equal to 1, I can actually write it like this. One more thing is, if I just want to write it in this fashion, I can write M2 this is what my C2 is when he tries to be a saver. And what about this guy? What about this guy? M2 minus R C1 minus M1. If you take minus common, this becomes R M1 minus C1. You with me? So these two things. This is going to be 1 plus R. I'm so sorry. So not only R, it should be 1 plus R. Sorry. So it should be 1 plus R. C1 minus M1, and if you take minus common, right? So this is essentially like this, right? This is essentially like this. So both of them are same, beta. Both of them are same. Whether you talk about being a saver or a borrower, the budget constraints are same. So I'll also write this in a present value and the future value form. Let me just put few more points. First, when M1 minus C1 is greater than 0, means you are saving, you will earn interest on savings. Consumer earns interest on savings. When M1 minus C1 is less than 0, consumer has borrowed, so consumer will be paying interest on savings. interest on borrowing, sorry. Consumer is paying interest on borrowings. If M1 is equal to C1, you've neither borrowed nor saved anything, and after the second period there is no other period, so you will be consuming everything or whatever your income is. So if M1 is equal to C1, then M2 is equal to C2. You get the point. So if you're not borrowed or saved anything in the first period, I mean, you won't do that in the second period, because after that period there is no other life in our model. The consumer is neither a borrower nor a lender, right? And this point is Polonius' point. Where he is neither a borrower nor a saver. Where he is neither a borrower nor a saver, right? So how do you go about that? You just write it like this, right? Is this okay? So now let us write our budget constraint. Again, let's write our budget constraint using the present value and the future value form. Writing the budget constraint in present value and future value form. Writing the budget constraint in present value or future value form. So you have what, beta? So when I write it like this, C2 equals to M2 plus M1 minus C1, those are your savings, plus R into M1 minus C1, interest on savings. So how do I write that? Can I just write it like this? M2 plus 1 plus R M1 minus C1. Okay. Let me also write it like this: 1 plus R M1 plus M2 minus 1 plus R C1. So can I write it like 1 plus R C1 plus C2 1 plus R M1 plus M2. I can write it like this. Can I do that? So this guy, beta, this thing, this one, this is the future value form of the budget constraint out here. This is the future value form, right? This is the future value form. So what do you mean by that? It is measuring the period 1 price relative to period 2 price. Measures period 1 price relative to period 2 price. But we are more accustomed of writing it in the present value form, right? We are more accustomed of writing this in the present value form. So we already have this, and what I can do is that I can write it like this. I can just divide throughout by 1 plus r. So it is C1 plus C2 upon 1 plus r equals to M1 plus M2 upon 1 plus r. This guy is the present value form of the budget constraint. So it is measuring the period 2 price relative to period 1 price. It measures period 2 price relative to period 1 price, right? So this is what my present value form of the budget constraint looks like. This is what the present value form of the budget constraint. Okay, now if I just want to write this or just draw this in terms of a diagram, so how can I do that? But I have consumption in time period 1 here, consumption in time period 2 here. Now just think about it. If I am going to consume everything in this period, right? If I am going to consume everything in this period, so in that case, C2 would be equal to 0, right? Just look at this guy, beta. I have this thing, C1 plus C2 upon 1 plus R equals to M1 plus M2 upon 1 plus R. So if I want to find out what is the maximum consumption I can have today, so in that case, I'll be consuming everything today itself, and I'll be taking up the entire borrowings of the next period. So C2 would be equal to 0. So when C2 would be equal to 0, C1 would be equal to M1 plus M2 upon 1 plus R. So this thing, beta, is M1 plus M2 upon 1 plus R, right? What about this? You have this guy here. If I want to find out what is the maximum consumption I can have tomorrow, so in that case C1 would be equal to 0. So 1 plus R C1 plus C2 1 plus R M1 plus M2. So C1 would be equal to 0. So in that case C2 is 1 plus R M1 plus M2. This thing would be there now. So this point is what? 1 plus R M1 plus M2. 1 plus R M1 plus M2, and if I join them together, right, so you get this kind of the curve. So this is what my budget line looks like. This is what my budget line looks like. So this is telling me I'm not going to consume anything today. I'll be consuming everything tomorrow. So I'll be saving everything, whatever I have, and I'll be consuming that tomorrow. What is this telling me? I'll be consuming everything today. I won't be consuming anything tomorrow. So I will be starving next period, but I'll just overeat everything in this period. And this is what my endowment is. So I'm starting with M1 level of income in time period 1 and M2 level of income in time period 2. So right, and one more thing is that the slope of this is going to be equal to 1 upon 1 plus r. That's going to be the slope. So slope of this would be what? dc2 by dc1. We'll just differentiate this guy, or you can just differentiate this guy, whichever you want to differentiate. So 1 plus r dc1 plus dc2 equal to 0. So since the slope you know, so just have to find out dc2 by dc1. So I can write it like this, what? So dc2 is equal to minus 1 plus r dc1. So you have dc2 by dc1 is equal to minus 1 plus r, minus 1 plus r. So the slope of budget constraint is minus 1 plus r, right? Okay, so this is what I wanted to do in this recording. Thank you, beta.